Fantastic. Okay, I'm Peter Tugwell. I'm an OMERACT researcher and rheumatologist from Ottawa, co-chair of the Equity Group. And I seem to have lost my slides. Brilliant. Okay, that's a good start. I've got all sorts of... Okay. Great. Okay, good. So this is the OMERACT 2020 Virtual SIG on Equity. Next, please. Okay, so first of all, we're trying out a new format here because we've got so many people. It's very difficult to have an interactive discussion with so many people within the 1 hour that we've allocated to special interest groups. We really do want your feedback as to whether this will go. And so rather than go around and try and introduce people, we're going to ask you to please go on the chat and say your name, say where you're from, and particularly tell us which stakeholder. We're really keen to know of any patients. Next. Next. Great. Okay, so I hope you all recognize the spirit of OMERACT, which has these 8 C's, particularly number 1, consensus, number 2, communication, number 3, collaboration. That's what it's all about. And Sean has put together this very nice picture that's just gone up on the web a few days ago. So please have a look at it and steal it and use it in all of your presentations. And I want to be sure that we also have fun. Next. Okay, housekeeping again. So first of all, please mute yourself when, except when speaking. Please, as I say, go ahead, and if you haven't done it, please right now, right on the chat, every single one of you, so that we can see your names, see where you're from, and see whether you're which stakeholder group, particularly the patients. Since we haven't got time to answer the questions in full, we set up a discussion board. So you have 14 days from now to send us your comments. The sooner the better. But we will commit to answering them every single day to make sure you get that feedback and get a discussion going. When you come on and talk, please put yourself on video unless there's a good reason not to. But if we're having trouble with bandwidth, you may want to turn off the videos. And at the end, again, evaluation is critical. We're only running at about 30% of evaluations with the sessions so far. So please, can we have 100% return to the evaluations that we're going to send you? Next. Okay, again, this is a team effort. As you probably know, I'm a big advocate this month of a thing called team science. No one of us can do anything useful alone. We need a group. So we have some wonderful co-chairs, some wonderful fellows that you'll be hearing from today, and some wonderful patient research partners. Next. Backed up by a wonderful group from the working group membership. And if your name is not there and you're on this call, please, before the end of this call, send Shauna a note and please ask to be added. Next. Okay, so just going to take you through some of the logic behind this session. Next. Next. Okay, first question. Have you read the background material, which was 3 videos? There was the introduction to OMERACT, there was the instrument selection, wonderful video by Lara, and a not so good video by myself telling you about the session. So if you put up, please go ahead and vote. You have very few seconds to do it, so get your mouse out and click like crazy. And we'll give you 25 seconds. Shauna's interpretation of 25 is great. Okay, there you go. So, all right. So congratulations. Give yourself a pat and a hug for the 82%. The others, it's never too late. You don't go look at it now, but at the end, before you send your evaluation, it would be really appreciated if you wouldn't mind having a look at those 3 videos. It won't take you too long. Next. All right, where did this all come from? Well, as you probably know, we have set up OMERACT to make sure it is patient-centered. Say it once, say it again, and say it yet again. Any trial in the world is only as good as their patient-important health outcomes. Second reason, next. Of course, you have to use the 3 criteria that we live and die for. And some people use this to TDF, stands to die for. Truth, discrimination, and feasibility. Next. And the next thing is to feel really comfortable with the SOMP, which we will be discussing for this next few minutes. And so it's really important that you feel comfortable with what the basic original, and Dorcas will give you the correct terminology of the SOMP, from which all other SOMPs are derived. And today we're going to derive the equity SOMP, which comes from this basic typical SOMP that Dorcas is going to tell you about. But I want to make the point, the regular SOMP that we've been doing, summary of measurement properties table, averages everyone out. So the disadvantaged get averaged into the advantaged. And we cannot look to be sure that the disadvantaged are actually being focused in on and looked after as they need to be. Next. Oh, God, my thing is gone again. I've now lost it totally. Okay. Okay, so now today we want to show that any of the outcome measures that we approve, endorse in OMERACT does indeed work well in different languages, different cultures, different levels of education, and other aspects of diversity. So we need an equity extension SOMP. Next. And here is the equity extension SOMP, which you are going to learn all about and learn to love by the end of this session. It's complex, yes, but we will help you master it step by step over the next few minutes. And if we have enough time at the end, we'll have some questions from you today. And I'm happy to hang on, of course. But then we really, really want you to ask questions on the special discussion board. And again, I've said we'll commit to giving you answers within 24 hours. Next. Okay, enough from me. Time to hear from someone like Regina, who's been absolutely wonderful working with us over this past 5 years. Regina?
Thank you, Peter. Greetings, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the rural high desert of Southern California. I'm very grateful to be part of the OMERACT team equity extension. This is some exciting work, and it ensures that patients like me are included and considered in clinical trials. Patient-centered is what Peter said at the beginning, and I really believe this ensures it. I want to self-identify real quick. I meet 10 of the progress elements. Rural, African-American, female, Catholic, 3% of the US population, religious, 67 years old. I'm a pensioner, and I've got some social capital. But the equity extension ensures that I'm considered and included in the research that we're about to, that you are engaged in. So I'm very grateful for this work, and I'm looking forward to a really robust session here. Thank you, Peter.
So I'll take over here now, and Jennifer, next, please. So I'm Dorcas, and I'm going to be walking you through the SOMP that we usually see, so that you can now understand a little bit more about the adjustments and adaptations that will be made for the equity extension of the SOMP. So this is a complete SOMP with the measurement properties we need to look at to make sure that an instrument can represent a target domain well in the columns, and then the articles in each of the rows. And just the occupied cells show us what each study studied in each of the rows. Next. So it really starts more like this. We start off by looking at each of the studies gathered in a systematic review of measurement properties and put an X in the cells to indicate the types of evidence that were found in each of the study. Now, each of those pieces of evidence are then evaluated for the quality of the methods that were used, so we can make sure that the study avoided any risk of bias. And that's now documented on the table by saying a green is great, no risk of bias, amber is okay, there's some cautions, and red would mean that they had found a study or a piece of evidence that had a risk of bias, and we wouldn't use that evidence any further. Next. We then look to OMERACT studies for the performance and see if the results of the study demonstrated that the instrument you're considering performed well on that measurement property or not. So plus means that it performed well, exceeded the standards. Plus or minus, equivocal, and negative, a negative result, even if it was in a well-designed study. Next. So the next piece is the synthesis. So we look at all the evidence, it's all been appraised and compared to the to the standards. And so now we're moving into synthesis for each of the measurement properties. So we look at down the columns and we decide if the measurement property would get a red, that it didn't perform well across all the pieces of evidence. Green would be that it had consistent findings supporting good performance in studies that had good methods. White meaning that there's no evidence available. And then if you bounce back up to amber, that's really all other scenarios. So maybe only one study or weaker methods, and it's raising some concern about maybe we should be getting some more evidence for this measurement property. We're really looking for consistent findings supporting the performance of this instrument across multiple studies with good methods. Next. So that synthesis is put across the row at the bottom there for each of the columns, and then you start to get a profile of how this instrument's performing across the many different measurement properties that are being considered. At the very bottom, we also ask the groups to give us their synthesis of the instrument as a whole. So should it be endorsed without question, which would be a solid green for each of the measurement properties, provisionally endorsed, and this one would be provisionally endorsed because it's a mixture of green and amber, or not endorsed. Perhaps based on the current body of evidence, it is not performing well. So in short, that's how we construct the SOMP to summarize the body of evidence that we're considering for an instrument going through the filter. Next. So now we're going to ask you, just based on that understanding, do you understand the explanation of sort of the rows and columns in the original SOMP? And the options are there. So Shauna, when you can initiate the poll, that would be great. Thank you. Great. Okay.
That's good. Great. Oh, next. Okay, so Jennifer's going to tell us about equity.
Okay, so when we say, I'm just going to give a brief description of what we mean when we talk about equity and progress. So when we say health equity, we're referring to the absence of unnecessary and avoidable differences in health outcomes. So you're probably most familiar with differences in health outcomes related to income, but we actually consider there to be a lot of population characteristics that could contribute to health inequities. And so we use the acronym PROGRESS to help us remember all the different population characteristics that could contribute to differences in health opportunities. So PROGRESS stands for place of residence, which relates to the country in which a person lives and whether it's high, middle, or low income, but it can also mean rural or urban settings. Then we have race, ethnicity, culture, and language, occupation and employment status, or whether somebody is employed, gender and sex, religion and faith, education, and here we usually capture literacy as well, socioeconomic status, and social capital. And you'll see in the header of this slide, we say Progress Plus. The plus allows us to capture additional characteristics that could create health inequities like age. And so next, we just have a Zoom poll. So do you feel that you understand the importance of equity considering these different population characteristics?
Everyone voting, vote, 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 vote.
Voting.
Wow.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, onwards. Next.
So next is Bev.
Bev is going to tell us about the health assessment questionnaire disability.
Thank you. Okay, so the health assessment questionnaire, commonly known to you guys as the HAQ, was originally developed in 1978 by Jim Fries in Stanford University. It was one of the first self-reported functional status disability and pain measures, so remember that. It is the dominant measurement instrument in many disease areas, including arthritis. It's mandated in outcomes in clinical trials in RA, and it is used throughout the world. Next, sorry. Next. So, the following questions are asked to the patients, and they must respond even if they do not think it is related to them at the time or relevant at all. For instance, talking about cutting your meat. So these are divided into upper and lower limbs. So some of the questions in the upper limb are, can they cut their meat? Can they open a new milk carton? Can they reach and get a 5-pound object from just above the head? Can they open car doors? And some of the examples in our lower limb would be about taking a tub bath, getting in and out of the car. But as you can see, there might be a problem with some of those. So you can read, there's additional ones. So if we go next. So the HAQ has some questions that are not relevant to some populations, so may need changing. For instance, patients cannot assess their pain and disability if the examples don't relate to them. What if they don't have a tub in different places? What if they don't have 5-pound bags of sugar, like in some places in Europe and other continents and countries? So what if they don't have milk in a carton? Where does the milk, if you're going to ask the question, it may not be relevant. Or if they're vegetarian and they're asked to ask about cutting meat. So these are just some examples that across different communities and common areas and cultures, they may not be relevant. So do you understand why this questionnaire like the HAQ might need modifying for different cultures or countries?
Great, we can get the questionnaire. I noticed some of you making some great comments. Thank you. What happens if they can't afford some of these things like cars? Very good.
Exactly. That'll be in our discussion. That's great. Oh, nice. Thank you. So next.
Can you? I can't see the results. Okay.
Oh, there they are. 98% very well.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, so next.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about our SOMP-Equity extension. So the first thing is just to review the original SOMP as presented by Dorcas a few moments ago. So in the original SOMP, each study gets presented in its own row. And what we're proposing is the OMERACT SOMP-Equity extension, which looks like this. And so the first major change for the SOMP-Equity extension is that each row would present data for different population or progress characteristics. And that way we could present how these different measurement properties have been assessed for populations for differences by different population characteristics. And the data for each of the studies would now actually go in the individual cells in the table. So for example, if we use the HAQ, a study might assess the feasibility of the HAQ across different cultures, and they might also, so that would be in this cell, but they might also present feasibility of the HAQ for different education levels, and then we would present that data here. So in the SOMP-Equity extension, one study could be presented across different rows if they've assessed differences in the population for different population characteristics. But like the SOMP, the same study could be presented in cells across different columns if they've also assessed progress characteristic across different measurement properties. So to review, the original SOMP is on the left. You're probably familiar with that one. And our SOMP-Equity extension is here on the right. And so at a glance, the SOMP-Equity extension tells us whether there's any evidence of differences for the different population characteristics for the different measurement properties. And we will show you one of these SOMP-Equity extensions populated with actual data in just a moment. But first, we just want to ask if you understand how our SOMP-Equity extension is different from the original SOMP, if you could answer the poll. Just keep voting. Okay, good. That's pretty good. So 68% very well and 29% moderately well. So next, Amy and Val are going to show us an example using the HAQ.
Right, so for this particular example that we're going to go through, we're going to be focusing on the first 3 columns, which look at the measurement properties of truth in regards to domain match, feasibility, and then truth in regards to construct validity. Next slide. So one of the several dozen papers we looked at was Hiffinger 2018, and they investigated potential bias in HAQ scores related to patients' socio-demographic background. And so when they looked specifically at people's employment status and then controlled for overall disability, they found that patients who were working had more difficulty with tasks that involved the hands. So like the cutting the meat example or opening jars, but less difficulty with more strenuous activities involving lower limb function, like walking or running. Then when they looked at sex and then again controlled for overall disability between males and females, they still found that males had more difficulty with tasks related to dressing and grooming, but less difficulty with tasks that required dexterity or were physically demanding. On the flip side, females had more difficulty with dexterity and physically demanding tasks, but less difficulty with dressing and grooming. The authors here did not examine anything related to domain match or feasibility within these populations or across employment status or sex. And then I'll let Valerie explain the next 2 rows.
Okay. So when you're looking at education and literacy, for education, 10 out of 30 items did not capture the same thing for people with more years of education than those with fewer years of education. And there was no clear difference between the upper and lower limb activities. In regards to age, people who were older reported differently to 14 out of 30 items compared to people who were younger. For example, older patients had less difficulty with hand function, but more difficulty with physically demanding activities. Next. So this table shows like a summary of the measurement properties completed for the HAQ studies that were included in our review, and which are and some columns are empty because there are no information provided for those across those columns. And according to the table, you can see that the culture, race, and language column has a lot of information. This is because most of the studies completed or carried out cultural adaptation and validation of the HAQ instruments into different languages and different cultural contexts. While some others, some other studies carried out assessments of other progress characteristics, but not all studies. But we had most of our information from the culture, language, and race category. Next.
So a question now is, do these examples that Amy and Val just presented help you understand the SOMP-Equity extension?
Wow, we just made the 51%. Good. Yep. Wow, we got through and it's not even half past. Whoa, okay. So some of us said, oh, we will get through before the hour. Anyway, that's amazing. So Bev, can you, we have some more questions first. Great, sorry.
Yeah, there's lots. Do you want do people raising their hand first or questions in the?
No. Let's go with the questions so we can get some.
Okay, some. Let me just go back. Some of these are.
Do you want me to do this question on the board first, Peter?
On the discussion board? Yeah, that'd be great.
There's
I was just gonna.
No. I want to.
Sorry, there's one more Zoom. It's just Shauna. There's another Zoom poll. Did you want to do this one first?
Yes, please go through all the Zoom polls.
Oh,
Yep.
I thought you said questions. Okay, yeah.
So this one is this SOMP-Equity extension useful for assessing equity considerations for OMERACT outcome instruments? You can vote, please.
Or some version of it. Okay, good. Another question?
That was the last of the Zoom polls.
Okay, great. Sorry. So Bev, you go. What were you?
So there's lots of congrats to everybody and thanks and introductions, and especially to Regina. I love your enthusiasm. I think that's great. Me too. So there's one that from Stephanie Taylor who asked, "Can you define social capital?" So do we want people to?
You want me to take that?
Stephanie, yeah, Stephanie, you there? So yeah, that's a good question, actually. Peter, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So what's happened was there's a wonderful paper in the New England Journal of Medicine showing that there are some places in the world where the health is superb, even though they're very, very, very poor. And so there's places in India and Sri Lanka and places. And so they went in and they studied them as to how on earth were they having good health despite the fact that they were so terribly poor. And they found that the community spirit, the presence of faith groups, churches, newspapers, sports, and helping each other made an incredible difference. So that's what we're talking about. Social capital is really very important. And it's something you can do without money.
Great, thank you. So then a little bit about the HAQ and just comments about people can't afford the cars. Very good point. Toilets in some countries may be on the floor. So you have to squat versus sit. So I think we really do have to take on the HAQ as we have discussed. Someone said, I understand the HAQ. Courage said, I understand the HAQ example very well because I have had to modify it in my own population study.
Oh, can we find out who that is?
Hear that? Do you want to talk about that, Courage?
Can that person speak and tell us about it?
Yeah, it's Courage.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Courage from Nigeria. I've had to do a COP study, and so I've had to use the HAQ in my study.
Yeah.
So some of the things I've had to modify, like the toilet seating. Most of my population would not have that kind of seating system, so it's mainly about squatting. And then vehicles, in terms of opening car doors, that also would not be available for a lot of people in my population. So the kind of transport that we use that is more common in that population, like the keke, napep, is like a tricycle, so that had to be used instead of car doors. So it's coming in and out, stepping down from the car cycle, from the tricycle and, climbing on it was what we had to use for that. And then, in terms of, instead of bending to pick, I had to use the prayer method, especially for the Muslim group in my population, because they had to kind of squat to pray, and that also will affect function. So those are some of the modifications I had to make in order to be able to communicate effectively with my population.
Thank you, Courage.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Great example. Nidhi said this, just a general point, would some of these things be assessed as contextual factors?
So we haven't had a contextual workshop. Is that coming next week?
Yeah, it's on. People should attend. It's on
okay,
the 12th.
so please take that question there.
Yeah.
And so we'll have that discussion, because again, the issue is to what extent do you include, what exactly do you include in context? But if it, and so there's a lot of discussion around how to define that. Clearly, a lot of this is yes, the answer, in my opinion, is absolutely. But here we are specifying specific ones that we think has an impact upon the disadvantage and inequities.
Great, thank you. Karine was saying that she thinks you should put race, culture, and language in different rows.
Yeah, we're bound to get a split between lumpers and splitters. I believe you can only remember 7 or 8 things, and progress has 8 items. And so you have to get rid of something if you're going to drop it. So yes, we're clumping at the moment, and we realize that's terrible in some people's opinion, but at least people can remember progress.
And in France, Jonathan and I think someone else said this as well, that some of the categories would be difficult or illegal to study, some of these things. So,
point taken. Sorry, I should have said thank you to Francis Guillemot and Jonathan Epstein, because you've led this equity group in the past and written some wonderful stuff in the proceedings, and a lot of it's based on the wonderful stuff we did on literacy. So I should have forgotten to say thank you, so I'm saying it now.
Yeah, and Jonathan and it was Francis who actually, I think, talked about that as well. Great. So same for occupation, employment status, good point. Data not assessed in some countries. So that's all taken care of now, I think. Credit should be. Are there any considerations given to non-binary? That's kind of the same topic, I think. Transgender. So then we go on to, there's a whole discussion around gender and transgender. I don't know, Jennifer, do you want to take that?
Well, actually, AMA responded that we just didn't have any studies, that we didn't find any data in any of the studies that we included that looked at it. So we don't have any examples, but it would be something that we need to get, I guess, studied more. So
and that would be under the gender
category.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how does this extension affect in the actual SOMP? That's from Nasseri.
That sounds like a question for Dorcas.
That's a Dorcas question. Did I pronounce the name right? Nasseri?
And the question was, how is this going to affect the SOMP?
The actual SOMP, yeah. How's the extension going to affect the actual SOMP?
Well, as you can see, it sort of flips it on its side. It does affect it quite a bit. I think what it does is it's drilling down. So I'm not sure, and I look forward to this group kind of guiding us in terms of how we should make use of it. Because we might have a picture of, like, let's say the HAQ in a SOMP, and now we're sort of separating all those to drill down more and to say, you know, do we have evidence that it can be used in different cultures? Do we have evidence that it's going to hang together properly in different genders? So I think it's going to be, I look forward to the group suggestions of how to manage it.
So I think it depends on the population you're going to put in your trial. So if your trial is in a population that has no problem with this, then it's okay. As soon as you're going to move to a trial which is appropriately inclusive, and I'm going to argue that we're going to need the equity extension.
Okay, that's a
good thing. Yeah, there's a discussion around the checklist too, and a couple of comments around checklists not leading to great equity measures. So, Dorcas, or
sorry, can you just explain that question a bit more? Who was it?
Rebecca and Stephanie and Grayson, you're just talking about reducing it to a checklist, and there's a whole conversation there about how the checklist doesn't actually, perfect, thank you.
So I would see a risk that researchers picked up the checklist and in their own little office in their big university went tick, 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 oh yes, we've used that, we've used the modified version, tick, 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 and then rolled out the research. I would see that the people who are being researched, the target population, should have engagement right from the start to understand how the checklist is relevant to that patient population. And actually in our country, New Zealand, increasingly that is a requirement for government, even competitive grants, particularly for research including Māori. So that's what I meant by the risk of the checklist, is people just continue doing what they're already doing, because I've done the checklist, and actually it fails to create real patient engagement with the actual people that the research affects. I think that's a good start. Maybe there are some other people who want to expand
Rebecca,
on that.
Could I ask you a question, Rebecca? Some of them are more statistical things and how the items are performing, but maybe those first two columns, the practicality, like the burden, the time, and that match to the target concept, you might find evidence of those, as Jennifer and the team, Amy and Valerie, did for the HAQ. But perhaps that's where we could also say that you need to actually go and work with the people, that your target population, to see how they understand this concept and these items.
Right. And
Dorcas, I think that's a really good place to land.
Yeah. Also, Rebecca, it isn't going to be people making their own decision. This is going to be evaluated by a group with the appropriate representation before they're allowed to say that it meets the checklist. So, but we'd welcome your help in doing that.
Yeah, I guess the problem is then, is that group truly representative? Because groups like that do tend to have particular representatives of a population, and this becomes particularly important, for example, in my country, where you could go 20 kilometres that way and engage with the Indigenous population, and they say it's fine, but actually you're also going to recruit people from 20 kilometres that way, and you haven't talked to them, and that's not okay. So,
Absolutely. So it sounds like we're going to come back to you on this, please. That's great.
Sure.
Good point, yeah.
And I'm not an expert. I am learning because I don't represent these populations. And the other point I just want to make, in some of the earlier votes, I actually voted, I understand moderately well, not very well, because I am white, wealthy, educated, etc. So I do not have sort of lived experience. So I want to stay a little bit humble about how much I can really understand these things and remain curious.
So lived experience is incredibly important to us. We do a lot of work with that in equity. So yes, absolutely, again. Yep.
Great, thank you. I love your picture. So Francis said it would be useful to specify how to assess the risk of bias and validity study in the specific context of Progress Plus.
There you go. Help Dorcas, help us.
Francis, help us. Well, and Francis and Jonathan, I mean, this is getting into some of we'd be looking at risk of bias in studies of differential item functioning. Like
if I can just take just a minute. Yes, the question about assessing a risk of bias is very important when you look at bias of selection of patients. But if you are in a particular case of progress examination, you just have to make sure that the good population is selected for examining the invariance of the measure between different types of subtypes of population by, I don't know, by gender, for instance. So is this what you mean, or is it meaning something that within a given item of progress, is there a diff, as you mentioned, or is there an instability of the measure in the different specific categories?
Yeah, most of them were that. Francis, they were studying the performance of the items and the scales in the different subgroups. Amy, you're nodding your head, so you agree with that. Yeah. But your point's well taken, that we might want to make sure that even within that, one quality check needs to include, how did they sample their equity groups? Was it just by chance, or did they really try to make sure they'd represented those groups well?
Perfect.
It's a good point.
Thank you. So Regina had asked about the tubs and stepping in and out of tubs. So I think we're going to get her on that task force for changing anything we do, because she's got lots of ideas. And then Oscar Russell mentioned, Peter, do you define the SES in progress to largely refer to patients' income?
No, it stands for socioeconomic status. So it's the interface between the social situation of the individual with the income, and it's the way that a lot of countries, of course, classify their inequities. But it is a composite index, and it's therefore we've got to include it. But I agree with you. We need to disaggregate it. So again, we're just not ending up looking at income.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, I think you addressed some of the stuff you wrote about engaging the population of interest and stuff. Yeah. So Niti had asked, can we measure to be, can a measure be fully endorsed for a core domain set if it has little to no evidence for equity SOMP, for the equity health equity SOMP?
Group.
When I saw that, I was like, oh, good question, Niti.
It's a very good question. I think it's up to this working group to be recommending how far this goes. What does this mean for all of these SOMPs?
I think we need to develop it and really feel comfortable before we say everyone has to do it to get the basic ones endorsed.
And I liked, Peter, I very much liked your comment earlier about think about the context of use. So because we're a clinical trial group, then if you're going to be doing a clinical trial and you're sampling from another subgroup, then you better make sure this tool is going to work well in that group. You've shifted your population almost.
Great. I see Sabrina's said, yes, it is all about context. Please come to her session next week.
Yeah.
Sabrina.
And Rebecca said, good point about there. Patient's point equals patient engagement in the study right from the start. That's Peter is always about that. So Mario, the tab equals nowadays are very easy to open, even with your elbow. Oh, okay. We're going to take a lot of those good comments back. I like that. So I was wondering the same about the core outcome. That was from Jonathan and Sabrina. There we go. Agree with Peter's answer about the contextual factors. Come to our session, and she put her contextual factors registration. And then if you need anything, Shauna can help us as well if you haven't registered for that one. So Tiffany had to go, I think. My doctor's okay. She's got to go. For construct. Oh, here we go, Dorcas. For construct, should we add a row when the exact data, whether progress factors are independent of each other?
Good point. We were thinking that probably each cell where you might have 4 or 5 studies is probably going to have to, like your cell under construct validity for a certain progress thing might have 4 studies in it, so we're going to have to subdivide them out. And somebody else in the comments I remember saying is that it's just saying that Smith, 2020 did a study is really shortchanging the study because there's a ton of work that goes in that. So that might just be a pointer to a bigger table that describes the actual content of those studies. Valerie and Amy, you probably found that it was pretty, just to have a little name in there is kind of like, oh.
We originally had a very massive table with many bullet points, and we had to pare it down to just, author and year. But it did feel like we were leaving a lot out by doing that.
Yeah.
Peter, you'll love this. Addie said, I agree, the true and inclusive co-production is essential.
Amen.
Corinne, should all trials meet the equity extension? I think we should, but many RCTs won't meet it. At least it should be transparent to say it didn't meet these standards. But there's already a scale to measure health equity in trials, right? Yeah. But not specific to rheumatology.
Well, yes.
And remember,
actually, Regina was at that meeting where it was decided what are the criteria for doing that in trials at Harvard.
Yeah, it was in the Harvard. Yes, Regina, was a fun meeting, wasn't it? It was a very intense meeting.
But that was about the equity of the effectiveness, right?
Yes.
And so we have to keep on remembering that our job is the equity of the outcome measure to put in a trial.
Well, yeah,
I think I moved a bit, but I guess both should be done, right? So you need to ensure your measures are valid for these population, and then you need to assess it.
You might not be able to see the equity of effectiveness if you don't have a measure that's sensitive to the equities in the outcome instruments.
Exactly. Okay. Okay, so Annalise, we struggled with language. Is it the language itself or whether these persons speak a language of a minority group? Good question, Annalise. Who wants to take that one? Jennifer or any of our other?
So, I mean, yeah, language is very complex. It's in the interface with culture. And there's this concept of intersectionality, which a number of you may have heard of, because it's very rare that one person has one specific feature, just as Regina said, she's got 4 or 5. And so, in fact, it's a various, and the question is it additive, synergistic, when it's all together in an individual, and how do you disaggregate that? And that's actually the cutting edge of some work that's going on that we're involved with within equity. But that's very tough to do in terms of sorting it out in a systematic fashion that you can measure. And so again, we have a separate group developing, and anyone who wants to join us is great. But right now, we don't have the information to actually apply it back to OMERACT just yet.
And Amy, was the language that you were doing the language reviews, right?
Yeah, so I was going to say that a number of the studies looked specifically at like translating the HAQ into Greek or Spanish or French. And those studies were all conducted in a country where that new language they were translating the HAQ into was like a primary language of that country. So they weren't like, they weren't ever looking at a Spanish version of the HAQ among Spanish speakers in the US or in Canada. It would be a Spanish version in Spain or a Greek version in Greece. That's at least what we found in the studies we looked at.
Great, thank you. So then there's a whole sort of discussion around making this, making it not mandatory but optional and encouraging people to do it. And Jazz, I think you wrote to provide guidance, develop the methodology, and not to make it mandatory or something, right? Jazz, did you want to address that stuff?
Yeah, no, I think with anything new, it brings with it the pros and cons. The pro is that this can make instruments much better for a wider international acceptability. The con is while you try to do it, it has resource and other burdens, and it'll be probably a decade or 3 decades before any measure meets that criteria. But I think the work should go on and work should start. So it's very worthy. This is very worthy of it. And then would have to, once this is done, we also need to provide trialists and others ways to adapt it without it being burdensome, both on patients and on trialists. So a challenge to meet, it could be met, but I think we have to just think of feasibility every time we think of, the checklist, another crosstab, how is this going to impact trial conduct and the discovery of new drugs and availability of those to our patients.
And Dorcas Martin David said there's probably no instrument yet that would, in which the full grain would be available. So we'll be working on that one.
Our fellows would be, you mean in terms of for the SOMP or for the equity extension?
Or equity extension, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the evidence just isn't there yet, right? Valerie and Amy and Jennifer?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's almost like you're opening a window to let people think about this, or walking through a door. You've opened a door to say, we need to be thinking and aware of this.
Thank you, Dorcas. I love that division. Very nice.
Addie said sectionality is important, and also Grace and others have sort of commented on that. Absolutely true, important point, Jazz. Do you take the account? Okay, this is the language one that Jonathan had written. I think we addressed the languages, but if there's anything else in languages that we haven't, please let us know. Oh, how did I get to the end of that? No, I think that was it. Okay, here we go, Jazz. How do we deal with instruments that have shortcomings? You can't easily change or adapt them. Oh, that's a good point, Martin. Dorcas, or?
If it has shortcomings in one situation, why should we be doing all the equity extension? So maybe that's a good point, that the SOMP needs to come first to just say, is the body of evidence in general leading us towards or away from this instrument? And if you want to invest in the instrument, then it might be worth investing in the equity extension.
Okay.
May I make a comment?
Yes, definitely.
Dorcas made a really great comment about opening a window. And this very much opens the window to, I don't even want to call it innovative thinking. I shared this seminar with a couple of my research partners at a couple of academic centers, and they said, oh, wow, this is great. This is something we've been struggling with. So they've got an open window, as Dorcas mentioned, to begin either drilling down or including this. The guidance is extremely important. So that open window concept, I think, is really good.
Good point. Everyone's made such good comments there. So then, Rebecca, did you want to talk about the reporting requirements, or we dealt with that?
Oh, I'd just extend that Francis has made a really good frame or a way to consider this. Is it a recommendation, a guideline, or a guide for reporting? I mean, that's really in how this work is framed when it's communicated and disseminated more widely.
Yeah, and Francis, if you want to talk about that as well, it's fine.
Yeah, Francis, tell us the difference.
Well, the point is, I'm endorsing the idea it should not be completely mandatory to pass the filter, but the question is, how do we, what kind of status will we give to this extension? Whether it should be only just a recommendation or a guide for reporting or something like that. I leave this open for the discussion, but I think it's important to not put that as a barrier, because either nothing will pass the filter or the SOMP will never be used.
Yep.
Okay. I think this is Martin, and I think this is really very important, Francis, as you say, because patients are often confronted if they are asked to give comments on an instrument, and they say that they don't like the instruments, or they point out actually the things that we are now discussing. They always are facing the comments of researchers telling them that the instruments are validated through a very rough process and they cannot be changed. And so I think that's very challenging, specifically for patients too. So I think having this kind of more than a checklist and educating also patients and specifically patient research partners how to use that would be very helpful, that they can really contribute from their perspective in not the development of new ones, but also selecting of existing instruments.
So something in plain language to empower the patients to challenge, right?
I agree, yeah.
Excellent.
And there, oh, Kathy, yeah, I agree. And then there was something in there about the transcultural validation and stuff as well, which, and so they're all saying, so Niti, do you want to say this, or do you want me to, about the HAQ and the Progress Plus relevance, or do you want me to read it?
I'm happy for you to read it.
So she said that might be feasible for new instruments, for the HAQ is well entrenched. So for the purposes of HAQ, maybe we have to understand how the data may be impacted by equity issues, rather than saying that we can't use the instrument, it doesn't meet the progress.
I think that's kind of consistent with what Francis is saying too. Yeah. Like don't put this up as a barrier, but put it up as something that's going to allow, you know, like Martin's saying, this framework will allow the patient's voice if they really don't feel the instrument is applicable. Yes. And this framework will help facilitate that.
Some questionnaires allow you, if it's not relevant to you, don't answer. Yeah. It does weird things to the scoring, but anyway.
It's not happy on our side of it when we get the data.
And then Grayson said that, I think so as well. I think it's something that new instruments must be held to. It should, you can say this yourself, Grayson, if you want to. It should be something that we use to revamp older measures, such as the HAQ, so that it's the newer versions were developed, it would meet these measures. So that's
let's get the people speaking to this. So Grayson?
Grayson, this is, yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where we have to be mindful of the world that we're living in now. And, you know, working in public health, all of the things that we've been doing this year are focused around health equity and how can we improve that. especially in a very racially segregated state like Wisconsin here in the US is right now. And I think that if we are not asking for this to be mandatory for new measures, we're not going to get as much bang for the buck, essentially, for opening that new window. Because people will say, oh, great, this window is open, but it's in a room I'm not in. I don't have to pay attention to it. As opposed to seeing this window open, knowing they have to pay attention to it, and that their new measure has to meet these standards, I think is something that we really have to hammer home, I guess, like from my public health experience, right? Like, if you don't make it mandatory, how many people will actually do it?
Yeah, good point. So we have 3 minutes left. So any burning questions?
Thanks, Grayson.
Jumping out there, Bev?
No, I think that was it. Jazz said about the methods, and did I get it? Is there anything else? I don't see anything else there.
Anyone want to speak up that they think hasn't been emphasized enough in the last couple of minutes?
So Peter, I'll just make a quick comment, which is that the inequity of getting people who cannot get into trials, i.e. their access to trial, their inclusion in trial, because enrolling the 80% white women in the trial is not easy, but it's much easier than getting 30% African American, Hispanic in your studies, men, Hispanic men or African American men or other minorities, poor people or people in lower SES strata. And I'm talking about in developed countries where most of the trials are being done. I think those are some of the huge challenges that you cannot possibly eliminate, even if you solve this issue about equity in the instrument per se. The trial populations and the evidence generalizability is still going to be limited. So is there a way in a separate parallel stream or somehow bring that out in some other way to bring that message out? Because what I believe, and in a biased fashion, that I think that has a much higher likelihood of impacting the ability to bring benefit to the most. This can help, but that can really help it in a big way.
Great. Yep. Super. So we'll come back to you just thinking how we might take that forward. Excellent. Absolutely. Good. Anything else anyone feels you want to comment on? Okay, I think we've done rather well finishing within the hour, because some people suggested it might never happen. And we'd only get to the first 2 of the 6 segments. So I'm rather happy about that. And so again, enormous thanks to the people that have put this together. As you realize the amount of effort that goes into these, particularly when they get broken down into steps, requires an enormous amount of work. And a lot of people on this had wonderful sets of slides that we had to ask them to reduce. So I do apologize in terms of just getting through. But I'm really pleased that we actually had a half presentation. We almost met the official criteria for a SIG, right, Bev, in terms of 25 minutes presentation and 40 minutes chat. So we never thought we would. So we didn't have to call it a webinar to actually spend our time apologizing. So I feel very good about that.
Yeah, we did well.
So,
Cheryl is on, and a couple of others in case if there's anything last minute.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You will be hearing from us. And don't forget the evaluation, 100%, please. And do
the discussion board, right, is open for
the discussion
2 weeks.
Before you go to bed tonight, please.
Shauna just put it into the chat, and it's also on the website. So please, yes.
And check out Sabrina's article on contextual factors before the workshop. Is that up on that website, Sabrina?
Great. It's very early here in Australia. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, everyone. Regina, good luck, and all their American friends.
Yes.
Good luck. Good luck today.
Thanks. We need it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Bye.